And then thank you for the recording and for the share screen.
Pleasure.
I'm glad. And Ian, good evening, Ian Taylor. I still don't know who M and D are, but we will see. Okay, I think it is time to begin, is it not?
Yes.
Jack?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I see there are a couple more. We might give it another minute or two. Why is there no shiur next week? No, I think there'll be a shiur. Good evening, Ian.
Evening.
Where are you?
Here.
Here, good. Okay.
In the capital, the everlasting capital, how do you call it, of the Jewish Empire?
The Jewish state. Okay, the everlasting capital. Wonderful. The eternal capital. The eternal capital. Yeah, okay, good. So I think we'll share screen. And we're basically going to continue with what we were talking about, which is namely annulment of marriage and what happened. In other words, a very what would seem to be practical solution actually to solving the aguna problem seems to be slipping further and further away as we move along in time. We talked about the Rivash and the Tashbetz, talked about the fact that all the rabbis in the whole region have to agree, and all the communities have to accept upon themselves Hafgat Kiddushin if a husband misbehaves. And if there's no universal consensus in the entire region, then we ought not to be doing Hafga'at Kiddushin. And the phrase La Halacha V'lo Ma'aseh is used in this context. And so we are going to go through the sources quite quickly. And then I will try and do a quick roundup at the end of this evening's shiur on what can be done to help agunot today. So we'll begin with Shut Yachin or Boaz, which is the Shelot Utshuvot of the Tashbetz's grandson, Rabbi Shimon ben Shlomo Duran, another prominent rabbi in Algiers. The Durans were the prominent rabbis in Algeria until the 18th century. Okay, he's called the Rashbash Hasheni. His father was the Rashbash Harishon, and he goes through the things that we've talked about. He says there's no question that, in principle, halacha permits a bet din or a community, a takanot hakahal, to annul a marriage retroactively for wrongful divorce, okay, or for misbehavior at the time of the collapse of a marriage. But nevertheless, mihu. So Jean, would you please begin this evening to read from line 12. Mihu.
12?
Yeah, mihu.
מיהו כתבו קצת מפרשים שדבר זה אינו אלא להלכה, אבל לא למעשה.
Okay, as we've said. Okay, but it's only theory, it's not to be put into practice. And who are these קצת מפרשים? וכן?
הרב יצחק בר ששת כתב לעניין מעשה, אין לסמוך על זה, וכתב, כן, אבל זה לא לגמרי נכון שהריבש התיר עם רבני הסביבה מסכימים.
That's correct, but he still said at the end that it was לעניין מעשה, and אין לסמוך על זה. וכתב?
ועל זה כתב שכן כתב הרשב"א, ז"ל, וכן כתב אדוני זקני הרשב"ץ, ז"ל.
The Tashbetz said the same thing, להלכה ולא למעשה. אין אנו יכולים
לעשות מעשה בציבור שהפקיעו קידושין, וכן שמענו שלא נעשה מעשה לעולם בדבר זה.
Okay, now this bit, of course, is tendentious. In other words, Rashbash says, and we never heard that anybody actually did anything like this. And of
Yes.
course, it's not true.
The
Hafgar
Ramban already
Kiddushin,
said.
Hafgar Kiddushin was done by the Gaonim, it was done by the Rishonim. It was, in fact, as we'll see, as late as the 16th century, Kilot were doing Hafgar Kiddushin. But this became like a slogan that poskim used, who were very scared of being mafkia Kiddushin. Lefi ze afilu tihiyeh.
Le Fizer filoutillé, qu'est-ce que c'est ça?
Maduna. Maduna is a place in the Tlemcen region in Algiers, okay? And the question that came from Maduna was again a typical question in this period. In other words, the Kahal, the community, has said that everybody who marries must do the marriage in front of the representatives of the community, and if they do not, then we will we'll talk about this soon. Why? Then we will annul the marriage. And they asked the Rashbash, and he said no. Even if Maduna Bichlal Machos Tlemcen wants to go ahead, en lahafkia, Jo en lahafkia.
קידושי זה האיש, אלא קידושין קיימים, וגם מאותם טעמים שכתבו, קידושין גמורים הן, קידושין ואין לה להיפטר ממנו כי אם בגט.
She will need a get. No Hafgad Kiddushin. Now we're going to move on to Maram al-Ashkar. Rabbi Moshe al-Ashkar lived from 1466. He was born in Zamora, Spain, and he left, of course, in 1492, not because he wanted to, because he was driven out, and he ended up in Tzvat.
Egypt.
He went to Tunis. He was a rabbi together with Rabbi Abraham Zacuto, another Spanish refugee in Tunis, and eventually he spent many years on the Bet Din of the Radbaz, Rabbi David ben Zimra. Where did Rabbi David ben Zimra live? Where was he a famous posek? Which country?
Mifostat?
In Egypt, in Cairo, actually. Yes, exactly. Radbaz, very famous, and Maram al-Ashkar sat on his bedin, and he became a very important Sephardi posek. As a youth, he studied in Toledo with the famous Rabbi Shmuel Valensi, and his chavruta was Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv, the Mar al-Abach. And therefore, it's no surprise that when at the end of his life he came to Tzfat, he sided with the Mar al-Abach against the smicha of Rabbi Yaakov Beirav and Rabbi Yosef Karo, and he left Tzfat, he went to Jerusalem, lived there for a couple of years, and then he passed away. Now, he's famous for three things. Number one, he was rescued from pirates who captured him when he was fleeing from Spain, and he introduced a family Purim with Mishloach Manot, a Suda, and a reading of the story of how he had been rescued from the pirates. He also wrote about the importance of making these family or communal Purims to remember one's salvation from danger. He also wrote the famous psak about the women's hair. We say, Seyar Bisha Erva, correct? Married woman, that is, has to have her hair covered. Can you leave the front of your hair uncovered? According to Halacha. Can you? According to the Maram al-Ashkar, who brought a tradition from Spain and France, you can. And therefore, even when he was in Egypt, when because of Muslim influence, Jewish married women were careful to keep their entire heads covered, when refugees arrived from Spain or France, Maram al-Ashkar gave them a heter to go about with the fringes of their hair, the front part of their hair exposed, because he said that was what was done in France and in Spain. He also claims in his tshuva that was done in the times of the Tanaim, that Jewish married women left the front of their hair exposed. And he said that erva, and this is interesting, has an element of relativity in it. Now, as you might say in the Gemara, hair in a married woman is something which is unseemly, but what is unseemly depends upon the convention of what people do. Okay? He says, for example, nobody would think of saying that an unmarried girl's hair being exposed is an erva. So he is the father, if you like, of the concept of relative erva, which we use in all sorts of other areas too. Okay? So there's no fixed standard. So that's as much as I'm going to say about that. The third thing he's famous for is disagreeing with Rabbeinu Tam about Shkia. As you know, Rabbeinu Tam counts Shkia from when the sky is clear of all redness, whereas we count Shkia from the sun drops over the horizon. And because of Maram al-Ashkar, strong opposition to Rabbeinu Tam, the Rabbeinu Tam's Shita approach became a minority one, although there are from people who still keep that, and they'll bring Shabbat out much later than most of us do. But most of us keep the Shkia, which was, as I said, contribution very famously of the Maharam al-Ashkar. He was also steeped in philosophy, Jewish philosophy, and he wrote a book of defenses against attacks on the Moreh Nevuchim, which is altogether very interesting. And in the introduction to the Sefer Hasagot, he writes as follows. He says, I was zealous for the religion and the faith, shoresh hamada v'atvuna, but also science and rationality. Amud haTorah v'chokhmah tmima, both the Torah and wisdom. Yam hadat v'hamezima degel hatu'uda, the sea of knowledge and enterprise. Hanoda b'Yisrael u'v'Yehuda, known in Israel and in Judah. Harav hamuvhak hechasid gadol or haolam u'pil'o, the wonder of the world, the rabbi, the expert, the chassid. Who's he? Moshav hayakar v'si'o, nobody greater. Hu kadosh harambam zal, asher samu oto hamorim matara lechitzei sifrutam. Foolish people have criticized the Rambam, aimed their arrows at him, and they've made their language and their imaginations into a razor-sharp sword. I'm going to deflect all of their criticisms and defend the Rambam. So this is a little about Maram al-Ashkar. So we're talking about the middle of the 16th century. He goes to the same question. This is to Thessaloniki. If you notice on line 19, Maram al-Ashkar became the posek in his day for the Sephardi world. Questions were addressed to him from Corfu, Constantinople, Tzfat, Tunis, Heraklion, Patros. I could give you a whole list, Brashar. Salonika. They wanted to know about a takana, hafgat kiddushin, when somebody does not marry in front of 10 Israelites and the chacham. Again, he goes through all of the poskim, including Zhor the Rivash. He says, yes, in theory it works, but lefika, im nimnu. Okay, so now I'm going to move on, and Yonat. I'm going to ask you to read, please, from line 28, the bold type. Lefikach.
8, where are we? לפיכך.
Yeah.
לפיכך, אם נמנו וגמרו כל אותה מדינה ורבניה עם הסכמת כל הקהילות או רובן, לסמוך
Ahani Ashli Ravravi, on these great pillars, okay? Ashli Ravravi are great rabbis, great support. If all of the rabbis and communities in the region, the entire country agree, then we can rely upon the Rashba and the Rivash and the Rosh that it is possible to annul a marriage. Ligdor veliknos kol hamekadesh.
כל המקדש כנגד הסכמתן וכנגד תקנתן ולהפקיע הקידושים ולהפקירן עד עולם.
או עד
איזה זמן שירצו.
Okay, now, that's it. In other words, if there is agreement in the entire region, then there can be hafga'at kiddushin, because the money didn't belong to the groom. And then gamani,
גם אני אצא בעקבותיהם ונאמן אחריהם ואכנס בעובי הקורה.
בעובי.
the thickness of the beam, I will put the beam on my shoulder, join all the people who are carrying the beam, and I will agree. Aval,
אבל בהסכמת קהל אחד קדוש מקהילות המדינה לבדם, איפה אני?
לא תבוא,
לא תבוא נפשי בסודם.
who said lo tavo nafshi b'yesodam?
Yaakov.
Yaakov exactly said to Shimon v'Levi, kalei chamas mechoret b'sodam al tavo nafshi u'vikalam al techad kavodi. So he's saying, if one community does it, then I will definitely not take part. I'm going to save you having to read all the rest. But this is the very practical argument the Maram al-Ashkar makes, and it really reflects on the fractured nature of Jewish communities in the diaspora. In other words, what happens if one kila down the road says, okay, we're going to mafkia kiddushi, and we're going to say that this woman, call her Miriam, okay, is now a single woman, she didn't have a get. But that takana isn't accepted by community bet. So if Miriam goes to community bet, they'll say, did you have a get? She'll say no, or say, well, how come you were going to marry someone? You are a married woman. But she'll say, well, there was a Hafgat Kiddushin in my community, Aleph. But Bet says, but we didn't accept Aleph. So here you're going to hit a very practical and I think a very serious issue indeed, because in Bet, if Miriam remarries, or it will be marriage as she's concerned, the children will be mamzerim. In Aleph, she's perfectly okay. She's a single woman because they are now married. But what Maram does, Maram al-Ashkar, he really hits on the central issue here. Are we going to endanger the status of a married woman by having different, can you go from one city to the other? In Zurich, you're a married woman, but in Geneva, you're not, okay? In London, you happen to be an Eshet Ish, but in Leeds, you're not. This is going to work out very badly. And what he says here, line 39, is that if this is what happens, ma ho'ilu b'takalatan, how the Chachamim help the situation? They may have helped a woman in one community get rid of a nasty husband by annulment of marriage, but da'atili de kilkul, it's going to cause a terrible tragedy. V'havaluhu mili d'rabanan, and in the words of the rabbis, v'takunehu, and the takanot will be k'chocha va'atlula. Jean, what's a chocha va'atlula?
Exactly, I don't know.
It is a mockery, a mockery. You're going to make the rabbis into a laughing stock. How can any serious legal mind accept the fact that we're going to fragment the issue of marital status? It's like saying you're a married woman when you get on your plane and you leave Tel Aviv. But when you get out of the territorial waters of Tel Aviv and enter those of Greece, well, you're a single woman. Does that make any sense? Now, just a second. I have a voice on my left saying something which I know too, that Rabbi Goren once tried to do that in a different context, that of conversion, and we talked about that, and look what happened. An absolute mess, and I can see Brian Sheppy Nachas here nodding away, grinning like a Cheshire cat, because that was exactly the point he made when we talked about this. It's a legal nonsense, okay? But what he's talking about is the danger of a fragmented application of annulment of marriage. If an entire country does it, but even then you might say, well, look, one country, another country, is it a wise course? And therefore, he gives a lot of arguments here. But one of the arguments to do with the fact that you cannot bind another community by a takana. So what does he say? At the end, I'm going to read. Okay, you're not finished, please. On page 2, line 1 at the end. Klala de milta. klal hadavar.
קללה דמילתא
מילתא.
דתקנה, זו לא תקנה היא וצריכה גט.
You'll need a get, it's not a takana. ואין זה
ואין זה צריך לפנים
נאום נאמן בברית משה
משה
בן
כהרב
כבוד הרב רבי יצחק ז"ל אבן על השקעה. By the
אשכרה
way,
ולא יאיר.
he was very interested in ancient coins, had a huge collection of ancient coins, and he knew a lot about them, but that's altogether just a piece of rabbinical responsa trivia. Maram al Ashkar, his great collection of matbeot atikot, he refers to in his shutim. Now I'm going to show the development here nicely, I think, because let's go to Fez in 1494. There's a takana. Fez, Morocco, the Castilian community, of course, the Spanish refugees, they came to Morocco, Algiers, Tunis, and there is a takana in a famous collection of takanot Fez. Shum bar Yisrael lo yikadesh shum bat Yisrael kim davka b'minyan asara. You have to have a marriage in front of 10 Jews. Jews marry in front of 10 people. Uvetocham chachami chachmei ha'ir. And he already getting to the rabbi having to be present to make sure that it's all working right, okay? We're formalizing marriage. Hanifraim me'akahal, or dayan me'dayanei ha'ir, or one of the dayanim. V'chen b'chnisatam lechuppah. And when they go into the chuppah, if there was a waiting period between the kiddushin or erusin and the nisu in the chuppah. V'im yeh b'ofan acher me'atan u'mafkim me'otam ha'kiddushin. Hafgat kiddushin. If you go on 100 years and you go to the same takanot Fez, what do you see? Listen carefully. Elul, Shin Nun Bet, it's Elul 1592. Tofes Haskamat Inyana Kiddushin. This is the local takana in relation to Kiddushin. Shekol mi sherotze lekadesh isha mikano lahabaa. Whoever wants to marry from today onwards, lo yikadesh ota zulat b'fnei chacham echachmei ha'ma'amad yitzu. You have to have there the Chacham HaMa'amad. And anybody knows that Spanish Portuguese Jews in London or Amsterdam knows about the Ma'amad, and they are very powerful. I missed out, of course, Sheirith Israel in Central Park West. But the Ma'amad is the powerful appointed body of the Sephardic communities. Yitzu, Yishmareim, Tsureim, Yitreim. Of course, may God look after them and all that. Or Rosh Yeshiva, Vasaram Israel, or the Rosh Yeshiva and a minion of 10. And if you break the takana and you do a clandestine wedding, nun samach. What do you think that means?
Oh, כל מה של נון סמך. 150.
What?
It's not 110.
Nun is how much?
50.
50. Samach is a
60.
A coin.
Yeah. Give me a Hebrew coin beginning with
Solidus.
Samach. Sela, Slaim. 50 Slaim. Hamakadesh, Yifra. Abbreviations, without them, it's difficult to read the tshuva. So, over the years, one accumulates a large thesaurus of abbreviations. Tamishim Slaim. So the Khatan who breaks the takana, he'll have to pay 50 Slaim. Or Kolma, which is like 50 ducats, is a lot of money. Or Kolma Shira'el and Agidul Nadanim Itzu, or any fine that the Dayanim and the Ma'amad will place on him. Yishair Beveit Asurim, and he'll stay in prison. Achi ten get kasher lamukudeshet, until he gives a get to the woman he married. He cannot leave on Shabbat or Yom Tov. Achi garshena beget kasher. They had prisons, where they kept these badly behaved Jews, the Jewish community. And what happens if the mother and father say, well, actually, though he's kidnapped the bride and he had a private wedding, we're happy. I mean, maybe a rich accountant. The force of a takana, the kahal say no, she has to be divorced. As long as he's not a kohen, harashut biyadam. Okay. So what I showed
ואין
you,
זה גט מעושה?
no. He's
הם אומרים
fine.
שלא יצא מן
The punishment is for breaking the takana. He's not being forced to give her a get. He can say, I will pay the money and I will stay in jail, but he has an option. Okay? I mean, this is indirect coercion. Good point. It is indirect coercion. He's like any indirect coercion. If you are punished, okay, for an offense or a crime, then the rabbis can go to the punishing authority and say, take the sentence down if he gives a get. That's fine. Okay? We could deprive you of a benefit. For example, we could say you'll go home on Shabbat and Yom Tov. Give the get. It's not beating him until he says, I'm going to give the get. What we're saying here is that you're punished for breaking the takana of the Chachamim. Part of the punishment is to give a get. Okay? So that's exactly how it works in many of these indirect coercion cases. He can marry her afterwards if he wants, but the punishment for disobeying the rabbis is to give the get. Okay? And in this case, it's looked at as an indirect.
Francis, can you do me a favor? I'd like to have some water here when I take pills. So take this bottle and just put
Can we
some.
please not hear about the pills? And can we mute, please? Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Okay, number 5. We're now moving to Rabbi Yosef Karo. This is very interesting. Rabbi Yosef Karo, okay, wrote famous books of Psak. He wrote the Bet Yosef on the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, of course. But he also wrote Shuvot. Now, he doesn't say anything about Hafkat Kiddushin in the Shulchan Aruch. If you look for Hafkat Kiddushin in the Shulchan Aruch, you won't find anything. But you will find a statement in his Responsa, Shut Bet Yosef. Now, what does he say here? I will read it for you. And again, very interesting. What he says is, Ata lekadmana shelatchem. I received your question, says the great Rav Yosef Karo, al davar. And actually, the question came from Hama, which is Hamat. In which country is Hamat? Levo Hamat? Syria, exactly. It's a little north of Damascus. Yeah. And it's them Syrians might not like it. But in the Torah, Levo Hamat is the northeastern border. Okay, so we are entitled to be occupying Syria, if you're a biblical prophetic type.
Okay.
We know that the Kiddushin were done between a woman and Mordechai. But people said, people in Hamat said, no, not Kiddushin, wasn't done before a Bet Din or with their permission. Va'omar shesamach b'hora'ah zo al tshuvat hari bar sheshet, as you said, John, and they rely on the Rivash. And now they want to know whether that is right or not, if that takana is valid. Tshuva. It's a terrible decision. And we're amazed. Anybody's got a little scent or odor of Torah, fragrance, shall we say, of Torah, can make a lenient decision to annul a marriage. זה מה שנראה לי ז'ון בנידון זה להלכה, אבל למעשה הייתי חוכך להחמיר. ולא הייתי סומך על דעתי זו לחומר העניין או הוציאה בלא גט, אם לא בהסכמת כל חכמי הגלילות. כי היכי דלמטיה נשיבה מקשורה עד כאן לשונו. We would need the entire country of Syria, all the communities, Khaleb, Damascus, before we can even think about justifying such a takana. V'chatava Rashbar Tzemach, and we read Rabbi Shimon ben Shlomo Tzemach, the Rashbar Shasheni, b'takanat hafkat ha'kiddushin lo na'aseh ba ma'aseh lo'olam, וכבר נשאל ראשונים ולא סמכו לעשות במעשה, וכן כתב, it should be אבי זקני בתשובה על כאן לשונו ברשב"ץ. Subject to what I said about that being an exaggeration, about never having been done. אין ספק שאם יש מי שהורג כן שלא הגיע להוראה, and Rav Yosef Karo says anybody who makes Avkat Kiddushin is not worthy of being a rabbi, אינו בקיא Gitin v'Kiddushin. There's nothing about marriage and divorce. Shouldn't be dealing with them. Numat Sair, Yosef ben Kevod Mareno Rav Ephraim Karo, Zecher, okay, etc., etc. Okay. L'chayei, if you want to know, Zichrono l'chayei ha'olam haba. That's Dalha. Okay. So there we are. That's Rabbi Yosef Karo. The Ramah simply says, קהל שתקנו ועשו הסכמה ביניהם שכל מי שמקדש לו 10 או כיוצא בזה ועבר אחד לקידש חיישינן לקידושין וצריכה גט אף על פי שהקהל התנו בפירוש לא יקדש קידושין והתקירו ממונו אפילו הכי יש להחמיר לעניין מעשה. Same thing. By the time we get to the Ramah and Rabbi Yosef Karo in the 16th century, Rabbi Yosef Karo died in 1575, the Ramah in 1572, it's clear that there is a wall-to-wall rabbinic opposition, part of the great poskim, to any type of Hafkat Kiddushin. But here, I'd like to just share with you the beauty of Tshuvot. Dead? Okay, come. This is just cute. Okay? The beauty of Tshuvot is that you get to read about what happened in real life in Jewish history. So you don't have this. But I'm going to read a Tshuvah, or give you an account of a Tshuvah by Rabbi Yaakov Heilprin. Rabbi Yaakov Heilprin was the rabbi of Padua in northern Italy. Now, Italy, as you know, is divided into northern Italy and southern Italy. Northern Italy is actually very, very European, okay? A lot of European rabbis were rabbis in Italy. You order to get real Italiano, you need to go south, okay? But this is very much like Ashkenaz. So Rabbi Yaakov Heilprin, a member of the famous rabbinical Heilprin family.
Water in the bottle, that's what I said.
Oh,
Whatever. We're talking about beginning of the 17th century, Padua, northern Italy. Now, what happened was that there was a young woman called Bona, and Rabbi Heilprin plays on the name. Bona, of course, is like bueno or bien, means good. So he says, I hear the cries of a young woman called Bona. I assume she's good because her name means good, and I hope that she really is good. And she should continue to be good. But people are talking about her and a boyfriend called Nachshon. So I think there's a bit of a Romeo and Juliet thing here in Padua. Bona and Nachshon are a couple, they're in love, but their parents, of course, want them to marry other people. So what do? In the dead of night, stones are thrown at a prearranged time at Bona's window, okay? She opens the window made of Venetian glass, and as she lights the torch, she sees Nachshon with 2 Jewish males over the age of 13, not blind, not insane apparently, shomer mitzvot, friends who want to allow them to do what probably many Jews and other people wanted to do, marry who they wanted to, and not the marriage that their parents wanted to have for them. So this is, as I said, a Romeo and Juliet situation. And what do? It's just a pleasure to read these things. Apparently, she has a long rope, and she lets the rope down. And Nachshon attaches the ring to the bottom of the rope. All this is done in the dead of night. She pulls the rope up, and she says Nachshon, and she tugs on the rope. Nachshon says in front of the 2 witnesses, she slips it on and she puts a ring finger out of the window. There's a torch there, okay? So that the witnesses can see the ring is on her finger. Declaration was made. Apparently within eye shot, it is sufficient and now they are legally
married.
Of course, there is a whole kerfuffle in the community because there is a takana. The takana is there to safeguard the rights of parents who say, you know, we don't want our sons and daughters to go off marrying for love. We've got a good marriage plan for Bona is a very good-looking girl, apparently. All this comes out in the tshuva, okay? It's a very good-looking girl, and she could get married to rich, older men, and they would support not only her, but us, her parents as well, and the siblings. So we're not going to stand for this. Let's be maf'il, a hafga'at kiddushin. Not at all. Not at all, okay? Rabbi Halprin doesn't even mention the possibility of hafga'at kiddushin here. He says that, first of all, and it's interesting, he says, I want to argue on behalf of Nachshon. He's not an evil boy. He married the girl in secret and at night. And he didn't do this because he was treacherous or rebellious. He says, Ha'ahava mekakelet et hashura. Love, what can you do in the face of love? And love distorts judgment. Ahava mekakelet et hashura. And he says, Kemo sheyesh pirtsa leganav. So he says, every beloved girl wants the adoration of a young lover, not an old, washed out, wiped out, rich accountant, but she wants a nice young man that she actually loves. And so he says, you know what? Fathers, withdraw. Don't bring the case to the Bet Din. Don't sully the good name of both of the families. And also, and it's very interesting, he says it'll make you into achucha v'atulula. So whilst we may think that everybody in those days got married in an arranged marriage, is not true. There were, and that's now we understand all of these cases we have been reading about of the takana, of the kahal in front of 10, the ma'amad in front of the Rav. Now the Rav could be there to make sure that the kiddushin are valid kiddushin, but mostly was to do with the fact that marriages were meant to be a source of financial security.
Mm-hmm.
And often young, attractive, intelligent girls were going to be married to men they had no interest in at all. And these cases of clandestine marriages were an expression of love. So there we are. And one more thing. I mean, he says a lot, but just to give you one more little cherry, I've cherry picked. He says, and what did Rabbi Akiva do with the daughter Rachel of Kalba Savoa? Did he marry with the approval of his father-in-law? No, he didn't. He went off clandestine, and he says, "Do you think you're better than Rabbi Akiva?" Okay, so he says, "Look, do the right thing here. Leave it alone. Let the young couple stay married, and let's have happy Jews, and we'll have fine families. And I know Nachshon, and I know Bona. Okay." And it's just a fascinating read, this tshuva, very human side here, okay? So I just wanted to bring that to your attention, but no mention anywhere of any takana. By the time we get to the 17th century, okay, they're not even making takanot. Well, not quite true. And here again, there's an exception to every rule. And we're going to read the Shut Penei Yitzchak, which is, now this took place in Damascus.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back to Syria. Shut Penei Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Abulafia. Okay, good Syrian name, Yitzchak Abulafia, the rabbi in Damascus. And the Syrian community, as you know, is a very tightly knit Jewish community. To this day, there are Syrian communities in South America, America and Syrian
Yep.
communities in North America, in Brooklyn. There's a big Syrian community, and we learnt about them when we talked about Giur. Syrians in Brooklyn to this day do not recognize Giur, and you are not allowed to marry a Ger. Doesn't matter how orthodox the Giur was, you do not marry a Ger. That's what the Syrians do to this day. So the Syrians, right up until the 19th century, were being mafkia kiddushin. They annulled a marriage if the groom misbehaved and didn't get married in front of the leaders of the community. If there was a clandestine marriage, you are not allowed to thwart the wishes of the parents. We have agreed many years ago שלא יוכל שום אדם לקדש בשני עדים שלו בעשרה ושלו ברשות רב או שלוחו. ותרי מעשרה יהיו ממוני הקהל. So the pattern is established. You need a rabbi, you need a minyan, and you also, in these communities, need representatives of the ma'amad, the people who lead the community, to make sure there's communal approval of your marriage. האיש אשר יעשה בזדון לקדש בצנעה בשני עדים לבד, דעבריין יתקרא, and anybody who doesn't conform will be called a sinner. גם הפגנו רבנן לקידושין מיני, they will be הפקרת קידושין, annulment. והפקירו כסף קידושין הפקר גמור, הפקר בית דין כבית דין דרבינה ורב אשי דעלימי להפקוי ממונה, and we can expropriate their funds just like the editors of a Babylonian Talmud, Ravina and Ravashi. We, the community in Damascus, because we had an unpleasant episode of a clandestine marriage, we have reintroduced and we have reestablished this takana, b'chol chozek v'tokef, as strongly as possible. Anybody who breaks it will be put into cherem. Kevan de ba'atra hadain damesek, God may look after it. הסכימו בפירוש הקידושין נפגעים והסכמה הזו נעשית בזמן הרב הגדול, מראינו הרב מרדכי גלנטה, שהיה אחר זמן מרן, who lived after Rabbi Yosef Karo. He was mid-18th century Damascus.
He was a musmach.
And he indeed, he was not a musmach. He lived in the 1700s, but he was a formidable halakhic authority.
A descendant of the first Galanti.
A descendant of the famous Moshe Galanti was, yes. So this is a descendant. And the elders of the community in the past agreed to annul a marriage, and not like Rabbi Yosef Karo. Now, what's the problem here? Problem is that in most of the Middle East and in the East, Rabbi Yosef Karo's psakim were accepted as the psakim of the door. In other words, we do not deviate. Who took on this view? Well, the Ben Ish Chai, Rabbi Yosef Chaim, the Chacham Bashi of Baghdad, wrote, if you like, the Sephardi Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, called Ben Ish Chai, and he disagrees with Maran. And who disagreed with the Ben Ish Chai? Rabbi
Yosef.
Rabbi Yosef went on a campaign, Lachziret Atara Lioshna, to bring back the Psakim of Rabbi Yosef Karo for Eretz Israel and the entire Middle East. Okay, so it is an issue. If you're in the Middle East, can you refuse to accept the decision of Rabbi Yosef Karo? Rabbi Yosef Karo says there's no hafka'ah. So how can Rabbi Yitzchak Abulafia say that we have inherited the annulment possibility from Rabbi Mordechai Galante and we're going to do it? Vadai dehem hema ratzu letaken takana kazot hefech svarat maran. Now, Rabbi Mordechai Galanti lived after the Shulchan Aruch, way after, because Shulchan Aruch died in 1575, and Mordechai Galanti was in the mid-1700s. So he knew that he was disagreeing with the Shulchan Aruch, Mishum Migdar Milta, because he wanted to prevent irregularities and bad things happening with clandestine marriages. What you can do, says Abulafia, is that in one particular detail, you can deviate from Rabbi Karo. Even though in general you will keep the psakim of Karo. Now here he makes a very interesting point. He says, there was a haskama amongst the Sephardic communities all over the Middle East to accept the decisions of Rabbi Yosef Karo. He says, one, not every single decision is binding. And number two, did Rabbi Yosef Karo rule on non-use of Hafgat Kiddushin in the Shulchan Aruch? What's the answer? The answer is, hello? Unmute. Tell me the answer. What did Rabbi Yosef Karo rule in his Shulchan Aruch? That Hafgat Kiddushin was not allowed.
Yes.
The answer is no, of course not. We just read it. He did it in his Tshuvot. You could have read the next line. Ela b'shut. And if it's in a responsum, this is very interesting. A responsum is not a definitive psak. You can disagree, you can change, because it's tailored to a particular situation at a particular time. The beauty of the tshuva is its flexibility. And so we are flexible about the flexible tshuva, and we will not make a tshuva binding upon us. And again, it's the beauty of the tshuvot. You can argue with them. Advarim pshutim u'bururim bilti safek klal. And of course, did that make everybody happy? Of course not. Immediately, Rabbi Shalom Moshe Chai Gajin, and to spare you the details, a Jerusalemite scholar in the middle of the 19th century, the same time as Rabbi Yitzchak Abulafia, he engages in a long correspondence and he berates Rav Abulafia. How can you do this? Hafgat Kiddushin, only if the whole Jewish world accepts it. And he says, and now Rabbi Abulafia says, saw this principle that you can deviate from Rabbi Yosef Karo in books of poskim. Even if it's an Isur Torah, which is undoing a marriage. But Abulafia doesn't tell us who the posek is. It's Abulafia's own argument. It's always good to dress up your argument with a claim to authority. What's Svarat HaKeres? An opinion coming from the stomach and not from the brain, okay? In other words, it's a foolish idea. The has, Hilol Haskir, and heaven forfend, we should mention this, that the great rabbis agreed not to follow Rabbi Karo, etc., etc. So there's a whole ongoing correspondence between Abulafia and Gajin. Abulafia held his ground. Gajin calls him an irresponsible and ignorant rabbi. You know, they didn't spare their words in those days. And Yitzchak Abulafia says, you know, okay, so what? You think I care? I don't. So they continued with annulment in Syria well into the 20th century. But the Syrians were a very ruly lot, and we don't have too many cases of Hafgah, but they were done. So I'm going to conclude this with the following reflection, okay? Hafgat Kiddushin was definitely done, and it has its roots in the Talmud Bavli, and even more so in the Talmud Yerushalmi. It's part of rabbinical authority to legislate, okay? This power then went into the communities. When they were homogeneous, they definitely used it. with the fragmentation of Jewish society in the diaspora and the local character of communal enactments, one could see that this might be a problem, okay? And the Maram al-Ashkar, to my mind, hits the nail on the head. He says, you know, we have a problem here. We're a fragmented Jewish community, and this is marriage, is sanctity, and mamzerut. Then use of annulment by one community as opposed to another might not be such a good idea. And although we could possibly push it through with general agreement of the region, which region and how much. So what I would add is the following question. How about the state of Israel? Is the state of Israel enough to be a region that's comprehensive enough to be able to mafkia kiddushin without fear of the fragmentation that Maram al-Ashkar raised? In other words, we have many laws here, okay? Laws about monogamy rather than polygamy, age of marriage, and we have a large, probably the largest Jewish community in the world, certainly the largest number of qualified Orthodox rabbis in the world. Why could we not pass a law gives a bet din in special cases the ability to get rid of a nasty recalcitrant husband in a nasty get case, the ability to annul the marriage? In other words, get around the terrible husbands who extort their wives, who force them to be agunot for years. Simply say, the kiddushin money you gave is expropriated by a takana, hefker bedin, hefker, it wasn't yours, your wife was, and you can even marry a kohen. Well, that is a question, and I will just add that quite a few years ago, such a bill was put on the table of the Knesset. It's never been taken up. The Haredi parties refused to raise this bill, and they say we cannot do Hafkat Kiddushin today. We know. I mean, we will not make it into a state law. We know that if you're in the know, then certain rabbis, very prominent ones, have done Hafkat Kiddushin. They're very careful to keep it under wraps. Very rarely is there any Hafkat Kiddushin, and it's usually together with a whole lot of other problems in relation to the Kiddushin. And what we say is that the Kiddushin, they don't really mean Hafkat Kiddushin. They mean the witnesses were not valid witnesses, and the witnesses didn't see the ring being given by the groom to the bride, and the witnesses were Sulei Edut, and all of that together means that they used the phrase Mafkia Kiddushin. But Rav Ovadia, in cases of certain influential Sephardi men, is known in secret, okay, to have done a full Hafka'ah along the lines of the Marasham. Okay, that famous case where you send off the husband with the get and the shaliach and all that, which is exactly like the Talmudic cases. So this is where we stand. So you can look it up and do your research. I wanted to conclude today with a quick roundup in English of how we can ameliorate the situation of an aguna who's refused a wife, who's refused to get unfairly and badly by a nasty husband. So, Jack, can you please begin by reading the recalcitrant spouse? Recalcitrant is simply a word for stubborn. Action, okay? Right. Number one, please. Get Museh.
The get Museh and the permission to beat a recalcitrant husband until he agrees in Baba Messiah 47a.
There are certain cases in which a bet din to this day can beat somebody up until they say, I want to do what the bet din says. And can you please give us those cases, Jack?
Therefore, since the man who refuses to divorce, or in order to do so by the bet din, wishes to be part of Israel and to perform the commandments and avoid sin, the beating is merely a way of freeing him from the domination of his evil inclination so that he can do the right thing. Hence, when he eventually agrees, it is not against his will, but in fulfillment of it.
So, Maimonides, Dinei Gerushin, Hilchot Gerushin, Bet Kaf. Rambam says, how can we mustn't force a husband against his will to give a get, but we can beat him until he says, I want to do what the rabbis say. How does that go together? Answer, we beat him to enable him to free himself of his Yetzer Hara. So as soon as the Yetzer Hara is beaten out of him, the true individual comes through and says, of course I want to do the right thing and give my wife a gift. And these are the men who we forced to divorce their wives. Okay, Brian, could you please read?
And these are the men whom we forced to divorce their wives.
Using direct coercion, beat him up.
A man smitten with boils.
Yep.
A man who has polypus.
That's a disgusting, stinking skin disease. Boils and disgusting skin disease, not good for romance and sex, okay?
I'm not sure I agree with that, but anyway, I think polypus is just an old-fashioned term for polyp.
Whatever. Stuff comes out of him. Greenish, grayish stuff oozes out.
Polyp doesn't have to, okay, whatever. A copper
That's
refiner.
what the Talmud means.
Okay.
A copper refiner.
And a tanner and an impotent
and what's
man.
What's wrong with them?
They smell.
Stink. They smell because of what they used in the old days in copper refining and tanning. And I spare you the lurid details. And an
impotent man from Ketubot 710.
Ketubot 710. Coercion.
Coercion also applies in cases where the husband is in breach of all the biblical obligations of marriage, food, clothing, and sexual gratification. Kesuvot ona.
Kesut v'ona. Good. Okay. So, these are things that the male rabbinical mind understood well. Nobody would force a woman to live with a man like this because we're looking at the intimacy aspect, and clearly this man is not a partner for anything intimate, and therefore Torah couldn't have destined a woman to remain in a marriage like this. So we help rid him of his evil inclination. We beat him and he says, I want to give my wife a get, or rather I want to do what the rabbis say. Rabbis say, give her a get. I really want to give her a get. As the blood pours out, okay? Now, number 4 is interesting. Brian, have a crack at that. In the case of a wife.
In the case of a wife who finds herself repulsed by her husband and cannot have intercourse with him, moredet, the husband is compelled to give her a get because she is not a captive to be compelled to have intercourse with a man she hates.
Now, this is the female side. Woman comes on and says, I cannot stand my husband. I hate him. Why? Does he stink? No. Does he have skin disease? No. Is he impotent? No. Is he unwilling to provide you with food, clothing, sexual gratification? No. Then you would say, well, what's wrong with him? Great husband, right? But the woman says, but I cannot live with him. I hate him. Emotionally speaking, he repulses me. And one rabbinical approach would be to say, what's that? And how can we measure it? And this is exactly what Rabbeinu Tam says, but he gives it a pejorative twist. Ian, please. Number 5, line 25. But
we do not compel. And yet,
yeah. Is it not clear, Ian?
Nee, die keer.
there is a morbid since we suspect that the wife set her eyes
Right.
upon another man. What's the problem?
Rabbeinu Tam
Okay.
en de Rosh.
All right. Okay. So Rabbeinu Tam says, perhaps the woman's just using it as an excuse. She doesn't like her husband. So she says, I hate him. I cannot live with this man. So we're not going to allow her to get out of the marriage because she's fallen in love with a tall blonde tennis coach rather than a short brown Jewish accountant. Okay? Putting it that way. So, number 6.
Compulsion of the husband is confined to the cases mentioned by sages in the Mishnah.
Who is reading now?
I don't know.
I was Ian Taylor. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. You're nuts. Your English is also excellent. Maimonides.
Deviates.
Deviates from this principle, and his ruling is not accepted. According to the Rashba.
Thank you, you're not. We are back to that, but I think there's a cross line here. Okay. So the rule is that we only beat the husband up in those cases mentioned in the
Mishnah.
In the Mishnah. Okay, thank you, you're not. I'm now calling upon Ian Taylor to read number 7, line 30.
We
Ian.
may justify compelling the get on the basis of an a fortiori argument from the case of the man afflicted with polypus.
Yeah,
that's what it is. Not nothing to do with polyps. It's polypus.
Yeah.
If we are prepared to compel because of an evil body odor, how much more
Brian?
should we compel to save the wife? All right.
Continue
and ongoing suffering.
Compelled to save the wife from continual and ongoing suffering.
She
now
can't
it is
stand
true.
the man. Release her for God's sake. Now it is true
that this position is not accepted by early authorities, but we are not mere reed cutters in a swamp. And in matters of logic, we are free to.
Why? Because southern Babylon, where Surah and Pumbedita were, is a swampy area. You know, the Babylon was built on swamp. And therefore, one of the professions of the lower classes was to go and cut reeds in a swamp. That's why it means, you know, the plebs, the plebeians. And in matters of logic, Ian, we are free
to rule independently, since a judge must decide on the basis of his own view of the case.
In other words, the Tashbetz tried to say that we can force, even in the case of the Moredet. Now, Moredet is a male name for a wife who comes and says, emotionally speaking, I cannot live in this marriage anymore. So the rabbis call her a Moredet. Your husband functions okay. He does the things he needs to do. What's wrong? But she says, I cannot. So Rambam says we force him after a year to give her a get. Rabbeinu Tam says no. And the Tashbet says, why can't we? Surely it is worse to live with a husband who hates you and who may be violent to you than it is with a stinking man. Perhaps you can get used to the stench. Now here there's a very interesting tshuva by the Radbaz. Okay. And
shall I continue?
And he, okay. Yeah, your question concerns 15.
Your question concerns a husband who regularly beats his wife and humiliates her.
Now we are coming to the situation of Aguna today, okay? Regular beating, humiliation. This is the sort of relationship in which women find themselves. Now, there is a ruling
by Rav Simcha that in such a case, a divorce may be compelled. But I am surprised by this ruling, since it will result in a get meuseh.
In other words, Rabbeinu Simcha, one of the Balei Tosafot, and the Tashbetz from a different part of the world, a different time, say, why can't we coerce the husband in the case of emotional and physical damage? But he says, no, I'm not. This is going to be a get museh, a coerced get, and any children
from the second marriage will be mamzerim. Coercion is understandable in the polypus case, since the sages understood that this is intolerable for women.
Now, the sages understood. Male rabbinical mind understands that if you cannot have sex, then there cannot be a marriage, and you should let the partner who's being injured leave. But they have a difficulty with the emotional side, okay? Or even with, in those days, a little bit of a beating here and there, perhaps was good for the wife. Today, we don't say that. But in the past, they did, and not such a distant past. Now, and then he says something very interesting. In this case,
however, he beats her on some occasions, but on others he makes her happy and buys her fine clothes.
Now, this is the battered wife syndrome. It's not that the wife is battered all the time, correct? You're not? Yeah, sometimes.
Correct. But today we don't accept even the beating only sometimes.
Exactly. No beating is allowed and no humiliation. But you can see that the Radbaz, from a male point of view, is commenting on what he can see, his eyes, okay? He says, look, what am I going to do? He's buying her fine clothes. He's nice today. He takes her out. She seems happy. Next week, she's miserable. Well, you know, perhaps it's not so bad.
Well, today women buy their own clothes, and she's probably saying, I don't want you to buy me just to think you're making me happy by this.
Very good. Have their own money. And Debbie says they didn't have their own money.
Yes.
All right. So
I'll be with you very soon.
Jack, we'll go back to you. Can you please finish this off? And Rashba wrote, line 6.
Okay, I'm available if he doesn't hear.
Okay, let's go back and see.
Okay.
Jack?
Yeah.
Are you here?
Yes. And Rashba wrote that we only compel in those cases listed in the Mishnah. So what should be done? The husband should take an oath that he will not beat. And if he desists, then all is well. If not, he is fined. If he desists, then all is well. If not, he is imprisoned for wife beating.
Now, imprisonment for wife beating is mentioned for the first time in the Tshuva of the Radbaz. You'll put a Jewish man in a Jewish prison and keep him there until he gives the get. Okay? And that is after, okay, but compelling him to divorce her.
But compelling him to divorce her is something that we may not do, since it will probably lead to the children becoming mamzerim.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share because we are out of time. We are going through the development very briefly of this issue of the modern type Agunah who has refused to get. So we've seen the early steps. We're with the Radbaz at present who says, fine him, put him in jail, okay, until he agrees, because indirect coercion will let you out of jail. You can choose to stay in jail, Jean. Stay in jail, okay, and some husbands do. We're going to complete this roundup at the beginning of next week, and then we'll change topics, and we'll stay with the Tashbetz and the Rivash, and go into the issue of, is a chief rabbi a halachic institution or not? Mm-hmm. So that's it. I know I'm over time, so I'm wishing everybody a very good evening. Besorot tovot, as always, chodesh tov, and a meaningful Elul, and Yonat, enjoy your Hawaii background there, okay? I can see the date, coconut palms and the sea, and everybody should be well. Next week, same time, same channel. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Shkoyach.
Bye.
Thank you.
Shkoyach.